Alrighty. Whew. I've never used a microphone before, so we'll go with this. But we'll get started. I want to thank you for having me here today. My name is Jackie Wood. I'm from FAU CARD, which is the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. We provide free consultation, training, and support for individuals with autism, their families, as well as professionals and community members that work with them. And we provide services throughout the age span, so from birth all the way through adulthood. So today we're going to just talk about kind of an overview of autism and then a review of basic behavior strategies as well. And please, I don't like to sit here and talk to you, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. If you have any comments, the only thing I do ask is that if you're referring to a specific individual, we refrain from using names just to kind of protect confidentiality. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So we'll start with just kind of a warm-up activity today, and then we'll discuss some definitions of autism as well as the prevalence. We'll go over some possible causes and common characteristics as well. And then we'll get into some of the behavior strategies that you can implement. And we'll discuss services and supports that FAU CARD can provide, and as well as other community services. So there's a lot of information about autism out there, about developmental disabilities in general. So I want to just start with talking about the difference between some facts and some myths. I have a few statements. I think rather than, since you're eating and comfortable, the directions say to move to the left if you think it's a myth and to the right if it's a fact. I think I'll just ask, do you think it's a fact? And you can raise your hand, do you think it's a myth? I think that might be easier. So individuals with developmental disabilities are only interested in childlike activities. Raise your hand if you think that is a fact. Raise your hand if you think that's a myth. Yes. So we do tend to see, especially in childhood, a preference for more childlike activities, topics, and that does come along with a developmental disability, but we have plenty of individuals with developmental disabilities that have very advanced interests as well. So it's very important not to kind of stereotype that, and also to promote age-level appropriate topics and interests as well. Individuals with developmental disabilities do not like to be around other people. Raise your hand if you think that's a fact. Raise your hand if you think that's a myth. Yes, that is a myth. This is on there, and this is a commonly believed myth because we do often see individuals with developmental disabilities alone. And it's not because they want to or like to be alone necessarily. It has more to do with they may lack the skills to interact with others. They may have difficulty with communication, so forming friendships and relationships is difficult. Developmental disabilities impact individuals throughout the lifespan, not only during childhood. Raise your hand if you think this is a fact. Raise your hand if you think this is a myth. Developmental disabilities, this is a fact. They impact individuals throughout their lifespan. They do begin earlier than age 3, so they're prevalent. And then with proper support and different therapies and things, we can work to minimize these effects of developmental disability, but they do occur throughout the lifespan. Developmental disabilities can impact every aspect of an individual's life, including daily living skills, leisure, education, employment, and social personal skills. Raise your hand if you think this is a fact. Raise your hand if you think this is a myth. Yes, that is a fact. We'll talk about some of the impacts that developmental disabilities and autism specifically have on an individual's life, on their family's lives, but it does tend to impact every piece of their lives given the characteristics that we often see. Individuals with developmental disabilities are unable to appropriately participate in leisure activities even with support. Raise your hand if you think this is a fact. Raise your hand if you think this is a myth. Yes. That piece with support, oftentimes we will have to provide some support to participate in peer level activities. But with that support, individuals can certainly participate. We just have to kind of figure out what the right level of support is, and also when we can kind of back down that support when they've become independent in the skills they need. Developmental disabilities occur among all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. Recent estimates in the United States show that about 1 in 6, or about 15% of children aged 3 through 17 years have one or more developmental disabilities. Raise your hand if you think this is a fact. Raise your hand if you think this is a myth. Yeah, I think those statistics kind of give it away. That's a fact. But that's quite a large amount. 15% of children do show signs of a developmental disability. Autism especially is on the rise. It's the most commonly diagnosed developmental disability, and we'll go over some of the statistics, but it's alarming at the rate that we're identifying autism. Developmental disabilities are a group of conditions due to an impairment in physical, learning, language, and behavior areas. Raise your hand if you think this is a fact. Raise your hand if you think this is a myth. Yes, that is a fact. So developmental disabilities impact physical, an individual's ability to learn, their language use, as well as behaviors. And I think this is the last one. Individuals with developmental disabilities are unable to make and keep friends. Raise your hand if you think this is a fact. Raise your hand if you think this is a myth. Yes, this is a myth. Again, that social piece is something we often see difficulty with. Communication is something we see difficulties with. So that impedes their ability to independently make friends and keep friends. But with support, they're human beings. You know, there's a social piece there. We just need to provide that encouragement and that support that they might require. So what is autism? Autism is a developmental disability. So again, with some of those facts that we talked about, it impacts pretty much every aspect of their lives, or it can impact every aspect of their lives. Autism is also a spectrum disorder, which means we have a really wide range of abilities and challenges. There's a very common saying that says, once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because there is such a wide range of characteristics that their needs, the amount of support, the types of supports we're going to provide are going to change based on the individual. You know, I work, before I was at CARD, I was a teacher, and I've had so many parents come to me and say, what is the perfect school for my child with autism? And it's not a kind of cookie cutter answer. It's really dependent on individuals and the support, so based on their interests, their abilities, and also their needs. Autism is also known as autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. You'll hear it referred to. So prior to 2013, autism was, we kind of have an umbrella term. It's a pervasive developmental disorder, or PDD. And under that umbrella, there were certain developmental disabilities that were kind of all individuals had similar characteristics, so they were umbrellaed together as either autistic disorder, Asperger's syndrome, PDD, NOS, Rett syndrome, which is more common in girls, and then childhood disintegrative disorder. Who here has heard of the term Asperger's before? Okay, quite common, and oftentimes individuals who were diagnosed as Asperger's have kind of a strong identity with Asperger's, again, because that's such a range of abilities. Asperger's is a more higher functioning type of autism. In 2013, and I know this is hard to read, but in 2013, the DSM-5 was updated, which means that's a diagnostic manual. They took away those terms PDD and Asperger's. and broke autism into 3 different levels. So you'll have autism spectrum disorder level 1, which is those individuals that are requiring support to be successful. Most individuals that have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder level 1 can have conversational interactions. They can express their wants and their needs, but there's still some, to a casual observer, you will notice that there's some difficulty in maybe reciprocating communication, or they need assistance with organization and planning and kind of initiating tasks. So level 2 is requiring substantial support. So there's going to need to be a little bit more support than that level 1 in order to be successful in communication and their behaviors. And then level 3 is requiring very substantial support. So those individuals tend to be nonverbal or have very limited verbal capabilities, difficulty interacting with others, and that's often when we see kind of that repetitive movement that I know is often associated with autism, or maybe the flapping. So they've kind of broken it up into 3 different levels. You most likely will still continue to hear things like Asperger's, again, because individuals who have been identified, I work with an adult social group for high-functioning individuals. They refer to themselves as Aspies, because there is kind of an identity piece with that. So you'll hear kind of a mixture. So the prevalence of ASD. The amount of people being diagnosed with ASD is increasing each year. In the 80s and 90s, we had about 1 in 2,500 people that were diagnosed with ASD. It is the fastest growing developmental disability. In Florida, between 1992 to 2001, we saw a 575% increase in the amount of diagnosis in ASD. In 2014, the CDC came out with new data that shows that 1 in 68 children, and 1 in 42 boys, and 1 in 189 girls have ASD. So that number has increased tremendously. We do know that an ASD diagnosis is more common in boys than in girls. There is also a lot of research being done right now in ASD in girls, because we have found that it's not necessarily less prevalent, we're just not as good at identifying it. ASD in girls tends to there are different characteristics that we're kind of learning now, that there is still that social impact, that communicative impact, but it presents itself differently. There are no ethnic or racial boundaries for autism, nor are there socioeconomic boundaries. Possible causes for autism. Who in here has heard of causes of autism? Okay. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact cause of autism. So there is a lot of research. Autism Speaks is currently the leader in research for causes of autism. We think we know possible causes. Again, we have to be careful, because that correlation of autism with certain things does not necessarily mean a cause. So scientifically, we don't have an exact cause. We do believe, many scientists believe, that genetics plays a big part in autism, as well as abnormalities in brain structure and neurochemical dysfunctions. One thing we do need to clear up, and there was a doctor that came and said parents and their attachment and the way that they respond to their children can cause autism. That doctor has been, his beliefs have been debunked, his theories were proven incorrect. So parents, families, they do not cause autism. Yes? The vaccines, scientifically, it has not been proven. The doctor also that created that theory, his study was debunked as well, and scientists have found him discreditable. So again, there's not to say absolutely no correlation. We just don't have the scientific evidence to say, yes, vaccinations do lead to autism. Yes. Again, there's still research though, so we can't say specifically that that is a leading cause. So again, more research is definitely needed into that possibility. We also know that a child's environment, family and school, can increase or decrease certain characteristics. So we know that early intervention is key. If we spot those difficulties early on with behavior, communication, and putting those supports in place, the more likely we are to have success throughout their lifespan.
Would that depend on what level they were at too?
Yes, it can, and usually if an individual is more impacted, we will notice it at a younger age. And then yes, that level of support is certainly warranted at a younger age. Generally, with schools, they will not identify, generally schools are identifying, if they do an evaluation, a developmental disability without a specific ASD label up until about age 6. And then at about age 6, we need to figure out, okay, is it a language deficit? Is it an autism spectrum disorder? But sometimes you're right, it's not prevalent, it's not obvious until a little bit later on. This is a video called Amazing Things Happen, and it kind of is a broad overview of, this is, a lot of specialists have helped work on this. It's a free resource. They have a whole series if you want to look into it. It's on YouTube. It's called Amazing Things Happen. I think it really does a nice job of kind of an autism overview. Let's see, maybe if I come up here and I'll try.
We are all different, and that's wonderful.
Should I let you help? Oh, I have to go over there. Thank you. Perfect.
Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, fears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn. That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects the senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make the person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same warp. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We will develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or mocking them. Remember, just because a PlayStation can't read an Xbox game, it doesn't mean it's broken. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to know them. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share that view with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
All right. So, who in here knows an individual that is impacted by ASD? I'm assuming most in here do. That's why we're here. So, the biggest piece is to understand that, again, there's such a wide range of individuality, and really understanding some of their needs and behaviors and communication style is really the best way to work with that individual and to increase their chances of success. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to kind of go through this kind of quickly. If you have questions, stop me. But just an overview of some common characteristics. And again, there is a lot of information in here. It's not to say that every individual experiences all of these things. Some may have a little bit of this, but it's, again, I don't want to stereotype to every individual with autism. As far as medical issues, generally individuals with autism are healthy. There are other pieces that do impact. We know that up to 28% of people with ASD do develop seizures sometime in their life. Sometimes difficulty with communication can make more minor things into a bigger issue. So if they're having a pain in their stomach, they might not be able to express that. So instead of identifying that right away, it might develop into something more severe that doesn't get recognized initially. Individuals with autism tend to be selective with the types of food, or they might refuse food or food groups, so we do see some undernourishment, and then also some safety concerns if there are behavioral difficulties as well. Autism does impact social development. Individuals with ASD tend to have difficulty relating to others. So their interactions tend to be instrumental, which is that when they interact, it tends to be to fulfill a need. So they need something or they want something, rather than kind of that expressive social emotional connection when they interact. I've had a lot of parents that say, my child will talk to me or request something, but I can't have a conversation with them about what did you do at school today, or what are you learning about in science, because their communication is strictly based on, I need something, I want something. The amount of interaction and the type of interaction, again, is impacted, tends to be very fact-based and short communication without a lot of extra details. And oftentimes individuals with autism if there's sensory overload going on, they tend to withdraw. So the interest in others may appear to be decreased. Sharing about experiences, again, it can be very difficult. Again, when I was a teacher, on Monday morning I would ask, what did you do this weekend? And even I had one little boy who his mom would tell me, we went to the South Florida Fair, and he rode on his favorite ride. I would ask him, and he'd say, I watched Paw Patrol. Because that was kind of his go-to, and that was every Monday. That's what he told me, because that's what his go-to was. He could respond, but he couldn't really reflect on what his experiences were. Difficulty with reciprocal nature of socializing and communicating. So oftentimes we teach kind of rote, hi, how are you? And these individuals, they can learn those rote conversational pieces, but as far as reciprocating and responding to questions and asking questions, they tend to have difficulty. Communication with individuals with ASD, there's a range. Some individuals are nonverbal or have very limited verbal abilities. Some are able to use short phrases, single words, 2 to 3 words, and some are fully conversational. As far as expressive communication, so their ability to express themselves, a lot of individuals have echolalia. So it might be immediate. You say, how are you today? And they'll look at you and say, how are you today? Sometimes it's delayed. I had a student who, if he was bored, he could replay an entire cooking show at his desk, and he could repeat every single word, and that's echolalia, delayed. He was bringing back, repeating what he had already heard. Perseveration or repetitive speech, you might hear individuals using kind of the same phrase over and over again, or perseverating, stuck on like one topic that they really like, that they want to talk about. Prosody or intonation, individuals with autism tend to have very robotic speech. Has anyone seen The Good Doctor in here? He speaks in kind of a very robotic manner, prosodic manner. Or they'll tend to have kind of one tone of voice without a lot of emotion or inflection. Their rate, if there's some processing needs, they might speak really slow. Or some individuals their thoughts are so fast that they speak really fast. Individuals with autism are very concrete thinkers. So they're very literal. Abstract thinking is difficult. Abstract language is difficult. So when we use like sayings or idioms, figurative language, like it's raining cats and dogs, they tend to take that very literally. Difficulty with pronouns, which this can really impact understanding what an individual is trying to tell you, because they'll mix up he, she. They will mix up yes, no. So sometimes it takes like visuals to really support them in communicating. And again, oftentimes their expressive language is centered around getting their needs and wants met. So receptive communication, so that's listening and understanding what people are saying to them. So they tend to, with multi-step directions, we need to really break those down into single step, because taking in all of that information can be very difficult if there's 3 steps that they need to follow. And again, understanding that abstract language, so joking and sarcasm, rhetorical questions. You might ask a rhetorical question and they might really answer you. Exaggerating and those idioms can be very difficult. And then the social use of language, so again, that back and forth, taking turns in a conversation can be very difficult. Taking others' perspectives, so knowing where someone else is coming from. We call that theory of mind. So I was working with a young man who is really interested in dating. He's 21. He's interested in dating. He went on a date with a young girl that he really liked, and she didn't call him back. And so we kind of walked through what did you do? And they went to a movie. I said, well, what movie did you go to? And he said, well, Godzilla. So, okay. did you ask her if she liked that movie? And he was like, well, doesn't everybody like Godzilla? He's like, I like it. And so we had to talk about, well, she might not, that's not the movie I would pick, you know. And then what did you do after? Well, we went to Chinese food. Did you ask her if she likes Chinese food? Well, no, but doesn't everybody like Chinese food? So really understanding that they kind of have that, if I'm good, if I'm enjoying myself, why wouldn't everybody be enjoying themselves? And this is a big one. 80% of our communication is nonverbal. Individuals with ASD have a very hard time picking up on nonverbal cues. So they might miss facial expressions, gestures, eye gaze. If you are talking to somebody and they're kind of looking at their watch, looking this way, what do you think? Yeah, they're bored. I'm going to take that as, okay, either I need to wrap this conversation up, or maybe I need to ask them a question or change the topic. If I miss that, if I don't see that someone's kind of giving me those clues, I'm just going to keep kind of on my monologue about what I want to talk about. Cognitive issues. So 75 to 80% of individuals with ASD may have some type of mental impact, mental retardation as it's in medical terms. About 20% are believed to function within the normal intelligence range. There are individuals who have above average intelligence, and then we do have the savant abilities, where there's an extreme ability beyond kind of even that gifted piece, but that extreme ability to recognize, and we tend to see that with concrete things like numbers, science. These percentages are difficult because testing with individuals with ASD can be very difficult. If there is behavioral challenges during testing, that's going to affect how they come across. Communication impacts testing. So it can be difficult to really gauge and from a cognitive standpoint. Restricted and limited interests. So individuals with autism tend to really rely on routine. They like routine, they like things to be the same. If their routine is changed, even slightly, you might see a really big reaction, or a hesitancy to do a new activity because that's unknown, that's out of the routine. If there is something planned that is out of the routine, we need to really prime them as best as we can. So talk about it ahead of time, that today we're going to have a new speaker come in. Show pictures, kind of talk about what it's going to look like, so that it's not just all of a sudden you have to do this, and I'm kind of giving you that change out of nowhere. Perceptive behavior. So verbal, they might want to talk about the topic that they really, really like. Motor is kind of that flapping, or you might see individuals pace, tapping on something nearby. And again, that specific interest. With little kids, I know like SpongeBob is huge, Thomas the Train, Sesame Street, and again, sometimes those intense interests form early on and continue with them into as they get older, so we see that kind of immature interests and likes. Play and leisure skills are also impacted. So oftentimes individuals with ASD will play, but not quite how we socially see play as appropriate. So focusing on parts of an object. So an individual, if you give them a toy truck, I had one student that would turn the toy truck over and just focus on that wheel and just wanted to spin the wheel rather than kind of seeing the whole truck for what it was. Again, using toys in a manner which they were not designated. A lot of times kids will line toys up in a line, maybe knock them over, or just want to keep lining them up, move them, line them up somewhere else. Some with ASD prefer to play with items that are not toys. I had a student that loved to play with pencils, and that was kind of his reward when he did something, he got all of his work done. He could play with the pencils because that's what he really enjoyed. There's not a lot of variability in how they play and what they play with. We can encourage kids because, again, if a child is only interested in something very limited, that's going to impact their social ability because other students aren't going to understand how to play with them or what they enjoy. So kind of integrating those interests into what everybody else is doing is a really key way to kind of bring those individuals in. And usually we do see individuals with ASD alone, playing alone. If other kids are together with them, it's usually parallel play, so they're not necessarily interacting. I know on the playground a lot of times it would turn into, they would play tag, but my students it just kind of turned into running in a circle. It wasn't so much I'm it and I'm chasing you, it was just I'm running. So without that interaction piece. And that's where we can intervene and really show that, hey, this is how you play tag, and this is the point, and we're going to practice tag. So we can intervene and we can provide supports. Online gaming tends to be really popular with especially like teens, young adults with autism. It kind of takes away the social, the communication piece, the social piece, but still interacting. Again, that's something to monitor because that can become a really intense interest as well, and then we know that it's not necessarily healthy to be playing computer and video games too often. And then problem behaviors. So we do see some challenging behaviors in some individuals with ASD. So we might see aggression or self-injury, and those are kind of the biggest pieces. Destruction of property and also disruption, so screaming, yelling, running around the room. So these issues are not unique to people with ASD. ASD does not cause problem behaviors. There's a function or a purpose behind their behaviors. Some of them are that self-reinforcing, that it serves a purpose to kind of calm them down, or perseverative. Usually, behavior is a type of communication. They're trying to communicate to you that they want something, they need something, but they don't have the words or that understanding of how to do it appropriately. So to remember the purpose of behaviors, because if we can determine the purpose of the behavior, we can do a lot to minimize those behaviors. So there's really we call those functions of behaviors or purposes. There's 4 main purposes, and we remember that by the acronym SEAT. So the first one is sensory. Individuals with ASD have that sensory overload. You saw in the video how we can kind of look and see one thing at a time. Everything kind of gets jumbled, and the noises and the sights and smells. So they might be having either sensory overload. Some individuals are undersensitized. So the feeling of my clothes, they're not able to feel that the way that I feel it. And so they kind of have that need for pressure or the sounds. The E stands for escape or avoidance. So I don't want to be here, I got to get out of here. Or I don't really like to write, so I'm going to do everything I can to distract you so I don't have to write. I don't have to do that. A very common one is attention. So I need you, I want your attention. And then tangible, that they want something physical that they can touch, a toy, food, a drink. Again, if we can find the purpose of that behavior, we can really work towards minimizing those behaviors. So we call it the ABCs of behavior, the antecedents. So figuring out what happened just before that behavior occurred to see what kind of triggered that. So is there a specific time of day that it's constantly happening? Is there a certain activity that it's constantly happening? And then notice the behavior. How did that person react? And then notice what happened immediately after the behavior. Did they get attention? And we have to remember that even negative attention is attention. So just because I'm angry with you, I'm upset, they might not really care that you're upset. They just got the attention that they wanted. Some other issues that might affect individuals with ASD is that sensitivity piece, either hypersensitive or hyposensitive, and then feeding issues, and also sleeping difficulties. A lot of individuals have difficulty either falling asleep at a decent time or difficulty staying asleep or waking up very early. And obviously, things can get, these behaviors, staying, cognitively involved in activities, those are all impacted if we're sleep deprived. So some strategies. Before I get into this, does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about? Okay. So we really want to think about the individuals that we know and work to prevent behaviors rather than work kind of reactively towards these behaviors. So as much as we can be consistent is going to be key. Individuals with an ASD really like routine. So using a picture schedule is very effective. Those are some examples of a visual schedule that shows this is what we're doing now, and this is what might come next. If they can kind of anticipate, okay, I know my routine is this, then this, then this, that's going to take some of the anxiety away. Timers are often very effective with individuals with autism. If they can see kind of, okay, I know that I use a visual timer, which is like a circle, and it's a red circle, and as the time goes away, the red kind of disappears. So they can see, okay, I have this much chunk of time left. Now I have this much chunk of time left. I'm going to be expected to transition to a new activity. Using songs during transitions to kind of distract from, and again, take away some of that anxiety of what's coming next, but, cleaning up and takes away a little bit of that, oh, I really don't enjoy this activity. This isn't something I like to do. But just using routines and things, if there's a song they really like, even if it has nothing to do with transitioning, but a song they really like to get them going, that can be helpful. Also setting clear rules and expectations. So if we're in the classroom, maybe before the student even has a seat, saying, okay, so today we're going to be working on this assignment. What do we need to do when we're sitting at our seat? We need to have our hands are still, our feet are still. We stay in our seat, eyes on the speaker, those kinds of things. Really, we should focus on what to do, because again, that literal language. If you tell me don't hit, okay, well, I might not hit anybody next to me, but I might have my hands in the air like this and distracting everybody around me. So again, that my hands are in my lap and focusing on this is exactly what I expect of you. And also keeping directions short. If an individual has difficulty with that receptive language, the less words we can use, the better. Also modeling those behaviors. Considering the physical arrangement, the environment, the less distractions tends to be the better. Oftentimes in classrooms we'll have centers or areas that are specific for, okay, this is where I know I'm going to work with other students. This is where I know I'm working just with the teacher. If a student has difficulty with personal space, creating boundaries. So I've used painter's tape to kind of say, okay, this is literally the physical square that your body should stay in. If you're out of it, you're going to be upsetting other people. You're too close. Carpet squares are really good too. I've used a hula hoop before. And of course, increased staffing. The more individuals we have, the easier it is to kind of give that individual attention and kind of see what to expect. It's not always the easiest, but trying to be creative, using older students and high school students, college students that might have volunteer hours that they need to fulfill. Okay, and so positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is that we're reinforcing those behaviors that we really want to see. So we always reinforce a behavior. A behavior is anything that you do. And we're constantly reinforcing behaviors. We can positively reinforce behaviors. We can also reinforce those negative behaviors, not knowing that we are. But when we see those positive behaviors, we positively reinforce them in the most natural way that we can. So if that person really likes when you give them attention, oh my goodness, you did a great job. I love the way that you came in and you sat right down and did exactly what you were supposed to do. That's obviously kind of the easiest, most natural reinforcement we can do. Sometimes an individual might need more of a visual where we say, okay, first we're going to do this activity that they might not really like, but then I'm going to give you a minute or two to do this activity that you really like. That first then board can work wonders. Having kind of some visuals of what your plans are for the day, so you can use that as a first, and then a then of things that that individual really likes and can access at that time. I can certainly send you, there's a ton out there, but I can send you a template that I have. Holly, I can send that to you and you can share it. Prompting and fading. So we also can shape behaviors. Prompting is very effective with individuals with ASD, and there's kind of a range of prompting. The most restrictive form of prompting is a physical prompt. So if you're working on raising your hand and that individual really doesn't understand that concept, you might say, Johnny, raise your hand, and then help him to actually raise his hand. We can do gestural prompting, so you can say, look at me, do this, and they can do that. Or verbal prompting, you need to raise your hand. So we tend to start with the most restrictive that individual can do, and then we want to kind of fade to less and less prompting because we don't want them to become dependent on those prompts, which does happen. Task analysis. So if you're noticing that a student has a really difficult time with a task, sometimes we have to kind of step back and think, okay, what are the steps that are involved in that? So if it's lining up, okay, that might mean I have to stand up, push in my chair, walk to the door, stand straight behind somebody else, keep a quiet mouth, and follow the person in front of me. Maybe they can stand up and push in their chair, but then they don't know where to go. So you might have to break it down and decide, okay, they can do this, but we really need to work on this piece. And that's where you're really going to focus your instruction. Modeling and requesting. So some individuals with ASD have difficulty recreating or imitating. But if that individual can, modeling a behavior, or even if it's a new experience, we use video modeling, which is, if someone has a really difficult time getting into the classroom, transitioning into the classroom, you can videotape a peer that is walking into the classroom and kind of following the routine, and then they can watch that and see what is expected of them, or if it's a new experience. We had one student who the parents really wanted to do equestrian therapy with them, so horse therapy, but the young child was really nervous about what to expect and kind of threw a fit when they got in the car and had a really hard time. So we went and we took a video of driving down the rocky road and seeing the horses, and so that he could kind of see exactly what to expect, what it was going to look like. And after viewing that 4 or 5 times, he decided, okay, I can give it a try. I know what it's going to look like. I know what to do. And then incidental teaching. If you see a student that is, he really wants to interact socially, we can follow that lead by using prompts and by using that praise. And you're showing me that this is something you really want to do, and this is a positive behavior. Let's encourage that and prompt so that they're successful, and then also provide that praise. Okay, so if the purpose is to get attention, we can use planned ignoring. So planned ignoring is not, I'm going to just turn around and not look at you, because that's not safe. But we can ignore some of those behaviors that are pretty innocent, maybe distracting, but pretty innocent. Because if I give you that, if I have a student that's sitting there going, teacher, 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 and I say, you need to have a quiet mouth, I've just given him that attention. Not positive attention, but it's still in his head attention. So if I can kind of just out of the side of my eye, I'm not going to look at him, but I'm going to say, hey class, what do you do if you want my attention? And have a student, you raise your hand, you have a quiet mouth. And then you can say, let's all practice that. And hopefully they will pick up on those strategies and say, oh, okay, he just got her attention, well now I'm going to try that. Also a non-reactive response. Sometimes if a student really wants your attention and they're doing things that are just completely inappropriate, or if they say something inappropriate, you might just say, oh, I'm sorry, and move on. So you just got my attention a little bit, but it doesn't really bother me, because sometimes when we do this planned ignoring, students will kind of up their behaviors and decide, well, if this isn't working, let me say something that I know gets an adult's attention. And if they say something that is not appropriate, you can just say, well, I didn't really like that, and move on. So don't give them a really emotional response, but just, I acknowledge you, so they'll stop, but then we're going to move on. And when you can figure out how to appropriately get my attention, then you get my attention. And using those prompts. With planned ignoring, we have to make sure that they're not self-injurious behaviors or aggressive behaviors towards anybody else. I would not recommend using planned ignoring in a crowded space, because there's just too many opportunities for those behaviors to interfere with somebody else, or for them to get, run into a crowded street, or where cars. So we have to be careful with planned ignoring, and again, it has to kind of be planned and thought out ahead of time. If the function is to get social interaction, again, like I said, follow their lead. If they want to be a part of this group, well, let them be a part of that group, but kind of show them examples of this is how we can interact, and working on turn taking. So if one student asks a question, well, this is how you answer. You need to say this, and work on that back and forth. Sometimes we see students that just kind of want to have control in the classroom or in their daily lives. A lot of students with ASD don't get a lot of say in most parts of their lives. So if there's one thing that they think they can take control of, they might want to just, really be stubborn, and I want to control this. Where we can provide choices. So, okay, you need a 2-minute break. Do you want to play with a puzzle? Do you want to go for a walk? If there's a snack choice, would you rather have this or this? I used to use, if a student didn't want to do a writing assignment, well, you can use a pencil, or do you want to use this cool marker? I don't really care if it's in marker. It's not going to affect me, but I wanted to see if they could do it, how they could do. I wanted them to participate. So those places where we can provide a little bit of change might just reinforce that behavior. And this is a big one. And this can be the hardest too. If a student wants something, they desire an item, if they throw a tantrum, throw a fit, and I say, oh, if you stop crying, I'm going to give this to you, and then I give it to you, well, we've just reinforced that if I throw a big enough fit, I'm going to get what I want. So we can't, and this is working in homes and working in classrooms, it's very hard to not reinforce those behaviors, because sometimes for us, just that stopping crying, that's enough. But we have to show them, okay, what was the appropriate way to get this? You wanted that toy that he was playing with, and you just went and grabbed it and maybe shoved him on the floor and walked away. Well, I'm going to take that from you now, and you're going to throw a fit, but we have to practice going over and saying, can I play with you? Or can I have a turn? And as far as that student is able to do those behaviors, we want to reinforce. Chances are, if their form of communication is to just go grab, you teaching them to say, you need to ask for a turn, it's not going to happen immediately. But if they show, they go sit next to the other student and kind of maybe don't grab it, but you can tell they're sitting there waiting for their turn to get it. I love how you're doing this. You're going to get a turn. And we want to reinforce that behavior immediately. So give them something that they really enjoy. And sensory input, and some of this is going to come from families too, because families will know they're really sensitive to smells. Smells can be overwhelming. Sounds can be overwhelming. If they're undersensitized, and you know that that's a common issue, you can say, can I give you a hug? And sometimes that pressure of a hug helps. Auditory or visual, if they need some of that stimulation, you can talk to families about, okay, what is it that really helps to calm them, to self-regulate themselves. Sometimes, if students are over-stimulized, headphones can help if it sounds, like if the whole class is participating in an activity and there's really loud, talking and laughing, headphones can help. Maybe they just need to kind of be in a separate little area to do their work so there's not as many distractions. Or maybe if you can stand and get your work done or do the appropriate thing, then you can stand. Kind of figuring out what in the environment might help. Okay, and then if their function or their purpose is to avoid the task or the activity, again, we want to do as much planned ignoring as we can for those negative behaviors. And then positively redirect. So it might be a direct, we're going to do this, or kind of the whole class. Hey class, how do we get started with this activity? And have a student kind of model that. You might have to also set up times where there's success. So I know he's really good at drawing, so maybe I'm going to put in something specific to say, okay, when we do this, I'm going to have you draw this part so you can show the class how you did it. And also, if a student's having a really hard time, we need to make sure it's at their ability. If it's really something that's too difficult for them, they're going to have a hard time initiating that task. Okay, and so to kind of summarize, and I guess this more just shows that ASD is really a spectrum disorder. There is a huge, that range of abilities. So we have the social piece. Some individuals are going to act kind of aloof, like they don't even see what's going on around them, kind of in their own world. Some individuals are going to be pretty passive, quiet. Doesn't mean that they don't want to be a part, they just don't understand how to interact. Some individuals are going to put themselves out there and they're going to interact, but maybe not in the most socially appropriate or accepted ways. Communication, you might have individuals who are nonverbal, you have some individuals who are fully verbal. But also we have to recognize that just because somebody is fully verbal does not necessarily mean that they have those skills. If I'm just having a monologue at you, that's not interacting. That's me talking about facts that I know or what interests me. Cognitive, again, we can have individuals who have mental retardation. We can have those savant abilities. So there's a huge range. Motor activities, we do tend to see a high incidence of clumsiness with individuals with ASD. So those motor activities are not fully developed. Some individuals, I have a student who loves to play soccer and he's really, really good, very coordinated. And then that's that sensory piece. So these are all kind of things that we have to look at and work with. when helping individuals with autism. So as far as who can help, the families are going to be the number one piece in this puzzle. They know what works. They know what certainly does not work. This is what we've tried, and sometimes it's successful, or this is what they really like, and this is what's really going to reinforce those behaviors. FAU card, we have staff that I work with adolescents through adults, but we have staff that works with birth through 5, and then elementary in between there as well. So we can come in and we can help with doing kind of an observation of just the environment and suggesting, well, maybe we need to put some visuals here, or this might help successfully. So I will give you my contact information, but we can, if there's specific cases that you're really needing help with, we can certainly come in and help. It might be a good idea to ask parents or families for permission to talk to a teacher and decide, well, if it's working in the classroom, what can we do here to help that success? Also, therapists, if there's a behavior therapist working with the family, they might be able to come in and help a couple of times, or just suggest, this is what we're working on at home, this is what you can work on here to ensure success. Okay. Does anyone have questions? I know that was a lot of information. Yes. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Eating is extremely difficult, and they tend to like very specific foods. Generally, it's going to be like carbs, things that are pretty bland. The best way to do it is to kind of take it in steps and work with that, like a first then. Like if you smell, if you tolerate this food, just smell it. If you do that, then I can give you a piece of what you really like. And then working their way up. So just put it on your lips, and then you get what you really like. And then the next sip might be, we've done like give it a kiss, and then you get a little piece of what you really like. And kind of working the way up there, then just lick it, then put it in your mouth, and eventually working up to putting it in your mouth and actually swallowing. But it tends to be very difficult. That's something that like behavior therapists can really give a lot of insight into. But I would recommend breaking that up into little steps and then reinforcing as he goes. So it's difficult for sure. Any other questions? Alrighty. If you think of anything, you can certainly, that's cards, contact information. My email address is at the very bottom. You can certainly feel free to email me with individual questions if they should come up. There's information up here about trainings that we have, more information about CARD services, and then our mentoring program as well if you're interested in learning more about CARD. I do have a training evaluation. I'm going to put some on tables. If you'd be so kind to fill it out, we would appreciate it. I have pens as well.